sent dollars to Europe and to Japan, and as long as America had a trade surplus with Europe and Japan, the dollars were going back to the United States in exchange for the net exports of the United States. That's what the Bretton Woods system was. Now that system was great, but it couldn't last. It could not outlive the end of the American trade surplus, because by the end of the 1960s, America was in deficit. So, Bretton Woods was kaput. And what followed it? A very strange beast followed Bretton Woods. We had a complete reversal. America went into a deficit, and because the American government, I'm not talking about the people, do not have the deficit phobia of the German nomenclatura. They do not suffer from deficit phobia. Remember what Nixon did, and his treasurer, John Connolly, and a young man whose name you may recall, Paul Volcker, who later on became the chairman of the Fed in the United States. In 1971, 72, they noticed, of course they noticed, that America had a very large trade surplus, and it was developing a very large budget deficit. Now, what would they have done had they been German? They would have said, austerity, tighten your belt, cut down. Huh? What did they do? The opposite. They said, okay, we have a large trade surplus. You know what a large trade deficit. You know what we're going to do? We're going to make it larger. We're going to step on the accelerator. And who's going to pay for it? The rest of the world. The Germans, the Japanese, later the Chinese. Because this is the model of globalization 1.0. The global imbalances that I was referring to. Come to think of it, between the late 70s and 2008, what you had was a situation where the United States of America, the economy of the USA, operated like a gigantic vacuum cleaner, sucking into the United States the net exports of Germany, of Italy, of the Arab states in terms of fuel, and of course Japan, and later China. So it was the deficit of the United States that was keeping the German, the Italian, the Japanese, and the Chinese factories going. It was creating, the deficit of the United States was creating aggregate demand for the net exports of Europe and Asia. Really very simple. But how was this deficit being paid for? Well, very simple. 70% of German, Italian, Japanese, and later Chinese profits migrated to Wall Street in a big tsunami of capital in order to be invested. And you had this recycling mechanism. The first recycling mechanism was not devised by ecologists, it was that. It was the foundation of globalization 1.0. Now, tragically, that tsunami of capital that was going to Wall Street, what happens if you give Wall Street bankers about 10 billion every 10 minutes? Even if it's only for 10 minutes to process it. They find ways of making it 20 billion. It's called financialization. So it's this leveraging and proliferation of the monies that were flooding into Wall Street that turned into the financialization drive, which in the end, under the weight of its own hubris, crashed and burned in 2008, and we had the major catastrophe of 2008. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because to imagine that we can revamp globalization without taking into consideration that the original model of globalization was based on permanent imbalances, when these permanent imbalances cannot be continued with, that is folly. It is idiocy. So if anybody wants to revive globalization, we need to find a way of doing it on a steady foundation of a balanced international economy. Here, I'm just going to mention it because it's just too large a topic to expand upon, but maybe if any one of you wants to take this further, we can do this during the Q&A. The idea is simple. We need a new Bretton Woods. A new Bretton Woods that finds, if you want, a market-based, but nevertheless designed mechanism for keeping trade balanced, not to have a huge vacuum cleaner in the United States, and not to have a country like China, or Germany, but China more so than Germany because it is getting larger, providing the West with its savings.